Okay, so we got our fly rafters in place. We got our blocking in place on those fly rafters, every 2 foot on center. Everything is nailed off and we are ready to start our sheathing process. So what we're gonna do here is we're actually gonna give ourselves a layout line for our roof sheathing. It's just a double precaution here. We know our fascia is pretty straight, but we're actually gonna push our roof sheathing up from our fascia just a little bit so it doesn't overhang. So we wanna give ourselves a really clean line to go off of. So again, our roof sheathing is 4x8. We're gonna use 5/8 OSB. You shouldn't use anything less than 5/8 thickness for your roof sheathing. And what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna come up 48 1/2 inch to make sure we have enough clearance so we don't overhang our front. So AJ has measured up from the fascia 48 1/2. I've done the same and we're gonna snap a line. Looking good. Alrighty. All right, so now on every common roof rafter here, we have a solid chalk line. And we really want to take our time with this first row to make sure that we bring that sheet all the way up to this chalk line. So a good practice, as long as you really take your time and get this first row straight, the rest of your roof is gonna go pretty effortless. If you don't get this first row straight and you have a couple sheets that are kind of zigzagging on you, even just like a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch is really gonna throw you off on the rest of the roof. This is a pretty small roof, but if you had, let's say, a 40-foot long roof and maybe a 20-foot run, and if you're off an 1/8 inch on your first row, that's gonna magnify up to about a 1/2 inch all the way at the top. So the more time you spend on this first row getting it extra perfect, the better the rest of your roof is gonna go. So AJ and I are gonna get down here on our scaffold and then we'll be ready to put our first sheet up. Okay, so again, our first sheet here is 4x8. And if you remember, our common rafters are laid out 2 foot on center. But we added on these fly rafters here, so our layout is a little bit thrown off, but that's okay. We'll just cut our first sheet. And if you want to, you can go ahead and take a measurement. You can hook on the end here. AJ will run the tape out, and he'll find out where his 8-foot mark is. So 8 foot actually lands in between those 2 bays right there. So he's gonna come back to the next rafter and find what the middle of that rafter is.
83 3/4.
All right, we got 83 3/4 there. So what we could do is we could take that sheet and cut it right on the ground and then bring it up and put it in place. If you're gonna do that, make sure that you take your measurement from your factory edge. So whenever we land a sheet on the middle of a roof rafter here, we want to make sure that we always put our factory edges on there because our factory edges are nice and straight, they're nice and square, and that's going to help us to keep the rest of the roof square. We'll use that as a reference for our next sheet coming up. Make sure that you take your measurements off of that, and then you can put your cut edge out here where there's nothing butting up to it, and if you're off just a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything. The second method that we can do is we can just bring up a full sheet and let it hang off, overhang the end here, and then we'll actually come back with the chalk line and just sight down the fly rafter, snap a line, and make one straight cut. And there's no measuring, there's no accidentally taking an inch off your tape measure. It's just a much more accurate way and fast way to do it. So we'll show that to you when we get there. So we're gonna go ahead and bring up a full sheet here. Okay, got the bottom. All right, so we have it up here. And you can see our side over there is overhanging our rafter. So we want to have AJ bring this sheet this way. And he's going to tell me to move it left or right until we are right in the center of that rafter.
Right there, it's pretty good on the top.
Looking good? Okay. Now AJ is going to bring his corner up to that line. I'll bring my corner up to my line. Looking good. And I'll hold it in place while he puts a tack in the bottom. Okay. He'll double check that top up there. Can you see that line? Looking good?
Looking good.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead, bring mine up to place. Looks good right there. Now before I tack my end, oops, slid down just a little bit. Before I tack my end, AJ wants to double check his rafter there to make sure that this sheet is exactly in the center. How are we looking?
Looks good.
All right, so AJ, you wanna come to the middle and hold this sheet? Still looking good on our line. And I'm gonna come down here and tack my corner. Right there. There we go. And I'm gonna stay back from this edge here because we have to come back a little bit later and cut this sheet off. Looking good. All right, so now our sheet is in place. We're gonna come along here, just double check our lines. Looks like we're good. And then I'm gonna tack it right in the middle here, just for the time being. Okay, now we're not gonna nail off this entire sheet quite yet. I like to get the next sheet up first, just to make sure that we got this sheet pretty straight. If we don't have this sheet straight, it's gonna be really apparent on the next sheet because it'll be going a little bit crooked off the roof. Maybe it'll be overhanging here, or maybe it'll have dropped down off our chalk line. So it's a good idea to get that sheet up here, match it up with this seam, and make sure that our edges are nice and flush, and our seam here is nice and tight at top and bottom. If we're nice and tight, nice and flush, and we're still on our line, that means that this sheet is nice and straight. If we do have to make any adjustments, we've only got 3 nails in here, and we can take them out and make an adjustment. So we're gonna go ahead, get down, move our scaffolding over, and we'll go ahead and get this next sheet up here. All right, so we got our second sheet up here, and we're gonna go ahead and slide it into place. And I'm actually gonna move right down here. You got a good handle on it, AJ?
Yep.
Okay. So we're gonna slowly bring it on top of our fascia here, and then bring it on down. And what we're trying to accomplish here is getting this bottom edge of this sheathing nice and smooth, nice and flush. Again, if we're off by a 1/16 here, it's gonna magnify as we go on up the roof. This is a small roof, so it's not gonna make too big of a difference here. But if this was a larger roof, it'd become a pretty big issue. All right, so we're nice and flush here. I'm gonna go ahead and tack this. Make sure we don't slide at all. Okay, and now I'm gonna have AJ go ahead and push up just a little bit. All right, so now we're nice and tight at our top. So we're smooth on the bottom of this 2 pieces of sheathing here. We have absolutely no gap on our seam here, and we have no gap up here. So we know we're running as straight as we can be at this point. So I'm gonna come here, tack in the middle. take the pressure off of AJ. Our sheet stayed. Now we're gonna double check our line here. Looks like we're pretty decent. We're still running straight along the fascia here. So it looks like our sheets are running pretty straight. So we can go ahead and nail all these sheets off. I did want to point out two things here. Whenever we are nailing any type of sheathing, either floor sheathing or roof sheathing, wall sheathing, when you put your first sheet on, try not to nail along this seam, because again, this is a factory edge and we want to keep this nice and clean for our reference for our next sheet. If we're nailing along here without this sheet here, maybe we miss with the hammer and dent it or ding it. Maybe the nail blows out the edge here and it doesn't leave you a nice clean edge as a reference anymore. So you can nail off all the other rafters, but leave the butt seam after you get the next sheet up. Once you get that sheet in place and nailed off, then you can go ahead and nail off your seam here, and you don't have to worry about blowing out your edge here. So we're gonna go ahead and get this sheet nailed off, and we're gonna do 6 on the edge and 8 in the field, just like all of our other sheathing. And then we'll be ready to put on the next row. So we'll go ahead and get this nailed off using 8-penny nails. Okay, so we got our first row of sheathing on. It's nice and straight, and we got it all nailed off. Again, every 8 inches on each rafter and every 6 inches along the edge. Just to remind you guys, whenever we're finishing nailing off these sheets, we left the end, because again, we're gonna snap a line with what we're overhanging over there. We don't want any screws in the path of the saw blade, so we'll go ahead and get that after we get our ends chopped off. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put on our next row of sheathing. This is a good, you could bring up a full sheet and cut it off, but it's a little bit hard bringing that full sheet, so we went ahead and pre-cut it. We have a measurement from the top here down of 30.5. So we went ahead and cut this sheet at 30.5. But before we bring it up, guys, we're gonna show you guys these H-clips. So whenever we are framing a roof, typically a roof is 24 on center. So we have a little bit wider of a space here than we would on like a floor or a wall. Usually we have 16 on center. So what we're gonna do is use these guys. These guys are H-clips. They just give a little bit more support. Basically they grab on the bottom sheet and then they grab on the top sheet. That way these sheets can't move back and forth. So what you do is you go ahead and put one of these guys right in the middle of each bay. They don't have to be perfect, just kind of eyeball it. And a lot of times when they come from the factory, sometimes they are just a little bit wide and they are really loose. So you can just pinch them together a little bit, put it on, and now they won't fall off when you get that next sheet on. All right, we'll go ahead and put one in each bay here. Yeah. All right, so now, if you remember back from our flooring video and our wall video, we're gonna stagger our sheets here. And if you remember, we don't wanna have a seam all the way up the roof, so we wanna stagger our seams. And what we mean by that is we got our 2 8-foot sheets on the bottom. So now instead of starting with our 8-foot sheet on the top, we're actually going to put the middle of that 8-foot sheet right on our seam here. So our seams are staggered. And again, this roof wants to go back and forth. This plywood is acting as a shear resistance for this roof. So if we go ahead and stagger these seams and break up that seam, it's gonna be a much stronger roof and it's not gonna wanna go back and forth when the wind's blowing. So we'll go ahead and get this sheet up here. All right, I got it. You wanna get up here? Okay. We'll bring it up a little bit high, and then we'll slide it down on our H-clips. All right, we wanna make sure that all of our H-clips catch here. The next thing we're making sure of is that both of our ends here fall right on the center of our roof rafter. So my end looks pretty good here. How does your end look, AJ?
Pretty good.
All right. So you can also see that we have a little bit of a gap here. These H clips actually serve a second purpose, and it gives us a good expansion joint. Whenever we have like a hot day and a cold day, our wooden material here likes to expand and contract. So this gives the proper spacing between the sheets, and you don't have to measure it. These H clips go ahead and do it for us. So we are ready to nail this sheet off. Again, we're going to use 8-penny nails, and we're going to nail the each roof rafter. Then we're going to go ahead and get our last 4-foot section over here and 4-foot section over here cut out. And when we get to that point, we're going to show you how to cut out for this roof vent here. Okay, so we have our sheet right here that we need to cut out, but we have an obstruction with this pipe. There's going to be a lot of times where you are sheeting a roof and you have vent pipes for bathrooms coming out, or maybe you have a chimney coming out, or any type of obstruction that's coming through a roof we have to cut around. There's a couple of different ways to measure, but there's one way that won't fail you anytime as long as you take some careful measurements. And I like to choose 2 reference points and always go off of those reference points. So when you choose a reference point, you want to focus on choosing a spot that's never going to change even after you cut it. So we have a factory edge coming along the bottom, or actually the top of this sheet. It's going to be the bottom of our next sheet. And then we have a factory edge right here. I don't like measuring off the edge of a roof because what's going to happen is if you measure from that way and you give yourself a little bit of room and then you go and cut that sheet, you're going to try to butt up against this factory edge, which is never going to change, and it's just going to be off a little bit. You're going to be fighting yourself. So take a measurement off of anything that's not going to change after you cut it. So what I like to do is I like to put my tape right on this first reference edge, and I'm going to sight down this pipe on the side and take a measurement of what we have in the front and what we have in the back. And then I'm going to add about a 1/4 inch to each measurement. So right here, in the front of the pipe here, I have about 1.25 inches. That's an exact measurement. So I'm going to subtract a 1/4 inch from the front of that. So I'm going to write 1 inch right here. And I know that's going to be the front. I'm going to go off this same reference point. I'm not going to come from the top of this board because this isn't a factory edge anymore, so that changed. I'm going to come off the same point and measure the back of the pipe. And it looks like I got 5 1/4 as an exact. So now I'm going to add a 1/4 inch. So we have a 1/4 inch play. So I said 5 1/4, so I'm going to go 5 1/2. Okay. Now I'm going to come from this reference point and get both sides of this edge of the pipe. So my exact is 3/4 inch. I'm going to subtract this way, so I'm going to do a 1/2 inch. And then I have 3 1/4, so I'm going to gain a 1/4 inch and go 3 1/2 here. Yeah, 3 1/2. All right, so now when I go down to my sheet down there, I can now go from the bottom edge. I'm basically, since we're gonna be tight here with our factory edges, I'm basically taking this reference line and changing it to my piece that I'm cutting, and I'm gonna make that my reference line so they match. And I'm gonna come up that 1 inch and then 5 1/2, draw my 2 lines, and then I'm gonna come in a 1/2 inch and then 3 1/2, draw my 2 lines, and I'm going to end up with a rectangle. And then I'm going to cut that rectangle out using probably a jigsaw. I'm going to make 4 holes and then jigsaw that little square out, and then we'll have a perfect fit. So for this one sheet here, it's pretty typical. If we have something that's this close to a corner, we would just go ahead and cut this little corner out. That's what we're gonna do here. But let's say this pipe was in the middle. That's when you would use this, this method here. What you don't wanna do, let's say this pipe was right here in this area here. What you don't wanna do is do a straight cut down, cut out all this material just so you can slide that sheet up. That's gonna leave a huge hole in your roof. There's no real good way to patch that. So we always make as small of a hole for our opening as possible, then we'll slide the sheet over. And if we use those reference lines, that method, your measurements will come out nice and neat every time because nothing will change after you cut it. Okay, so Azad was actually really nice, and as I was reading those numbers, he took all the measurements and he made a nice cut. So he actually took the time and left this material. So that's actually a really good job that Azad did here. So you can see now, as we use this reference line here, we took the measurements from this edge of the sheet. Those reference lines match up really well. Same with this bottom here. And now we have a really nice tight fit. We'll go ahead and nail this off. Same thing, 8 inches, an 8 penny every 8 inches, and we'll nail off this seam as well. And we'll be ready to do the other side.